Corruption of Consumption and Exposure, the FDA at a Glance, by Kimberly Simons. Hey guys, my name is Kimberly Simons. Today I'm going to be presenting to you a brief overview of the FDA. Some things we're going to go over today include chemicals and additives in modern processed foods. America today holds the record for most chemical usage in the world. Many of these chemicals are found in additives, as well as processed foods and pharmaceuticals. So even though the FDA is aware of the risks of some of these chemicals, they still choose to approve them every year. Today, we're going to figure out why. There are more than 70 known carcinogens containing chemicals used in everyday production in America today. In addition to this, there are several other harmful chemicals that play a role in many mental health epidemics, as well as organ destruction, cancer, and other respiratory and reproductive system illnesses. During this overview, we will briefly cover different companies that do add to the FDA and fund the FDA, and we'll also cover some of the government affiliations that have to do with the FDA and these approved chemical usages. I will warn first off that these are my own research findings. After I was about to do some of my own research just regarding the additives in the FDA's approval and how they affect the body, but I found some of this other information we're going to cover here somewhat interesting. So I would like to tell you that the end result of your opinion of this video or presentation has to do with the way that you think about it, and it's up to your own discretion. The year 1890 began the idea of processed foods because many people were afraid of famine. We were in a place in America where we were experiencing a lack of food and resources for fresh foods. Just as well as that, we really, back then in 1890, were worried about soldiers in the war and how they were going to get nutrition and things like that. So the processed food endeavor was created for conveniency as well as time efficiency for citizens back here in America. In 1910, the first processed foods were introduced. Among the first introduced were Nathan's hot dogs, Aunt Jemima syrup, Oreos, Crisco, Fluff, and Kraft macaroni and cheese. The need for processed food would someday fulfill not only... let's try that again, sorry. So the need processed foods would someday fulfill would not only benefit soldiers at war, but would also benefit citizens through cost and time efficiency. Though the idea seems so simplistic and harmless, the future of processed foods containing hundreds of different chemicals and additives would soon overshadow the innocence of its pioneering production. A recent article from The Atlantic suggests that over 70% of today's percentages of food consumption are derived from processed foods. In theory, that only covers about 65% of processed chemical consumption, leaving the rest up to pharmaceuticals. In the modules to follow, you will see some examples of processed chemicals. This list is not the entirely full list, however, there's a lot of chemicals listed here. And during the video, if you would like to pause the video and read into this a little more, you're more than welcome, but I'm going to try to move past this quickly because we're a bit strapped for time. As you can see here, this module covers a lot of the chemicals that are risk factors to the nervous system. Please be aware that all of these facts are derived from the link below, and each of these charts are created by me to better visualize how these systems work from processed chemicals. Module 1.3 here describes these chemicals that are risk factors for heart disease and other organs. Each of these range from moderate to extremely high risk factors. Module 1.2, respiratory and circulatory systems. And Module 1.4, cancers, tumors, and carcinomas, had to be split into 2 separate columns because the list is long. Again, these are just a few of the long list of chemicals that the FDA approves every year. As you can see, several of these chemicals are harmful and toxic to the human body. Most of these chemicals must be consumed in large volume to produce these results. However, prolonged exposure to these chemicals could produce risks of the illnesses noted above. As Americans, it is important for us to remember that we need to nourish our bodies with organic foods and less processed foods. We owe that to our health and longevity. Secondary to this, the more our society monopolizes, the harder it becomes to find authentic and natural food absent of contaminants and additives. Due to current events regarding farm industrialization and the decrease in local family-owned farms, we question the dangers of increased waste and chemical runoff through these endeavors. This approach will only continue to make wholesome crops and agriculture more contaminated, as companies are not entitled to release full disclosure of additives and exposures within their products. This module offers data suggesting the risks as well as some of the places these chemicals can be found that are all banned in several other countries and all approved by the US FDA. In theory, some scholars and opinionated citizens argue that the FDA allows these chemicals to remain in use because of the booming economy of healthcare, which is so closely related to these processes. As I researched more about the correlation between the FDA and the protection over these chemicals, I found significant information supporting the theory. The FDA is funded and sponsored by several multi-million-dollar companies, some from the food industry, some in pharmaceuticals, and some in medical equipment companies. These companies utilize their chemicals for cost efficiency as their technicians and scientists endlessly search for the cheapest way to produce their products. From these processes, the one that concerns me the most is the correlation between big pharmaceutical companies and the FDA. American medical costs are growing at a much higher rate than any other countries in the world at this moment. To me, this brings this agenda to a full circle of understanding. The FDA is directly affiliated with the approval of these costs as well as the approval of these chemicals to be utilized from these production companies. The more revenue that these companies bring in, the more the FDA profits from these economic waves. In a more simpler term, this means that the more citizens need to utilize medical services, equipment, and pharmaceuticals, the more money circulates back to these companies and the FDA. In correlation to the consumption and exposure of such chemicals, a theory can arise that the approval of such chemicals could be used to inflate medical epidemic percentages. This creates the need for more pharmaceutical and medical services and equipment utilization. Here's a visual graph showing expenditures of pharma contributions to the FDA, as well as pharma contributions to the Senate and the House for political party affiliations. In retrospect, the processed food industry could be used as a first stepping stone to produce more illness percentages in U.S. citizens, creating a demand for more pharmaceuticals. If this notion is correct, this means processed foods may be used to bring these services full circle, as many approved chemicals in America are known to cause several ailments to the body when consumed over time. In conclusion, several big-name production companies in regards to processed food, pharmacology, and other medical equipment are all interconnected to the FDA and other governmental affiliations. Through a plethora of published and reliable sources, quite a picture of correlation can be painted between all of these. So after being informed of these correlations, it is difficult to just disregard the idea that the FDA allows these chemicals to stay in production. This facilitates the agenda to stimulate the demand of the production that monopolizes the economy of the elites. As a listener, you have been given the raw facts and evident theory of correlations. Now it is up to you to decide what you will believe after receiving this information. Regardless of this theory, it is important for all citizens of the globe to embrace the facts that organic or natural foods are best for our bodies, and non-chemically processed foods are essential for our body to gain nutrients, which is vital to the health and the longevity of our lives. Thank you for listening to this presentation. Again, my name is Kimberly Simons.